All right, everybody, I got a new interview going for you today. I thought I'd bring this up on my channel and do something a little bit different. Today I got FLW Tour Pro, Cody Murray. He's on his rookie season on the FLW Tour. Cody, thanks for doing this interview with me, man.
Not a problem, man. Appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. I figured it'd be a good way for the viewers and listeners that I have on my podcast and on my YouTube channel to hear from somebody that's trying to make it in the pro fishing world, because I get questions all the time about how do I go pro, what do I need to do, and with you just now getting started and on your rookie season, I think it's a great way for people to get insight into how they can go about trying to do exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, so a little bit of background as far as what I've done to get to the level that I'm at now. I started fishing tournaments 20 years ago when I was 11. And, I fished at the local club level and did just draw tournaments. And from there, I started fishing a little bit bigger circuits in my area. And when I say bigger, I'm talking about club tournaments, 8 to 12 boats, going to a circuit that was maybe 50 to 70 boats, depending.
Was that like a team tournament?
Wasn't a team tournament. Was actually a pro-am style tournament.
Okay.
2 days, Saturday, Sunday tournaments. Always, no cut. Just you fished both days and you drew out a different pro each day. After that, I fished a little bit of the state federations and things like that, and then attempted to fish as a pro through what would now be the Costa Series.
Okay.
FLW Costa Series on the West Coast, and unsuccessfully did that for 2 years. Was young. I was 19 and 20, running on my own dime, working concrete when I was home, just traveling to those tournaments. And always needed to cut a check. And, when you're faced with that needing to cut a check problem, you're probably not going to fish that well.
So when you were 19 and 20, and then obviously where you're at now, what do you think the big difference was in your success last year versus when you were younger? Do you think it was, you just have more experience now, or was it a maturity thing from, being 19 and 20 to, being a little bit older now?
I think that a lot of it, was experience and maturity. When I was 21, actually when I was 20, still when I was 20, I started a concrete curbing business here where I live, and, kind of put the rods away for the most part. I mean, I know 1 year, I had my boat still, but I put 4 hours on the big motor, and 1 year I put 7 hours.
Wow. And
then the next year I believe it was 17 or 18 hours. So I pretty well put the rods away for quite a while. Then I had a child as well, my daughter. And so then I was never fishing on the weekends. Since I was my own contractor and owned my own business, I could fish, some weekdays and things like that. But, yeah, I would say that most of it would be, correlated with both experience and maturity, and knowing how to, when you're young, when you're 19 and 20, there's some great 19 and 20-year-old anglers out there. I think that high school fishing and college fishing have really boosted that, along with, say, the internet. Gives you the options. There's so many tools that these guys have at their fingertips that I never had. I mean, and if they were there, it was very minimal.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the information that you can get now, I mean, when there was tournaments, back in the early 2000s, even through mid 2000s, you didn't see results online for local tournaments for a month.
Right.
I mean, now you see those, within hours. So there's a lot of stuff out there that changed the game a bit. Even electronics. Man, when I was fishing, there was paper maps, and your depth finders.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. You didn't have any sort of mapping. There was nothing that you could do in that regard.
Maybe expand on depth finders, because I think there's a lot of young guys that listen to this. They may not even know what you're thinking of, and when you say depth finders, they're still thinking of the HDS units that we've had around for a little while now.
So when I started, the first guy that I fished with actually had paper graphs where you have to load the paper into the individual unit itself. And it's basically like a printer, and it prints off what it's seeing down there. But you're not getting contour at all like you get today. Not even a shade. A lot of guys, used to fish with flashers. I've been in mini boats over the course of time where guys were using flashers where, it's a round circular unit and there's different colors of lights flashing, and you can tell by where the light's flashing on the unit, that goes from, say, at the top 0 feet all the way around like a clock to maybe 60 feet. And wherever the line flashes hard, that's how you know what depth you're in.
Got it.
You're not seeing anything whatsoever.
Got it, yeah.
So that's where, like, for instance, if you're ice fishing and you're using a flasher, which guys still use,
right,
you're looking and you see the bottom flashing there steady, right? Like it's reading the bottom, say over here on this side. Well, when you see something start flashing right here, 10 feet shallower than where the bottom's flashing, there's a fish there. That's how the ice fishermen know there's fish.
Got it.
So, I grew up fishing on paper graphs and flashers, and it's a lot different. Now it's incredibly amazing. You look at your unit and you look at your mapping and you're like, oh, I'm going to fish over there because that point looks great.
Right. When you can see the contours and everything and how far that point goes out and everything like that, yeah.
Right. You can adjust to your water level, and you can make your map smaller because the lake's down 62 feet, so you can take your map down to 62 feet. Right. That's not at all. So it's a little different for me. I'm personally not that great on the graph. I mean, like if I see a fish there, I'm going to drop to it and I'm going to catch it. I mean, video game fish. But I'm not a guy that spends a ton of time on the graph. And being a West Coast guy, fishing back east, you can look at a lot of that stuff, but at the same time, you got to think, when I'm looking at this stuff that looks good, right? Like, you look at your map, you're like, oh man, that's really juicy. That's got it. At the same time, so is everybody else.
Right.
I mean, once you learn the fishing game, you understand what you should be looking for. And so, for me, I do a fair amount of graphing, but a lot of times all I'm doing is I'm coming into an area and I'm looking for a certain type of bottom. So, my last few tournaments, Gunnersville at the championship, my first tour event at Rayburn, and my second tour event at Toho, and now my third upcoming tour event at Seminole, are all grass lakes. So with my Garmin's, I've figured out how to look at that screen on my side imaging and know exactly what I'm looking at for grass. I mean, I can tell hydrilla from eelgrass, from peppergrass, and see all these different types of grass.
Right.
And know what I'm looking for. Then I've got to fish the grass, and I always fish the grass. A lot of times what I'll do, it's a little trick that I think that for someone like me who isn't still completely familiar with what they're seeing, I will take a crankbait or, a treble hook plug and throw it out there into the grass, catch that grass and see what it looks like. Because you're looking for that really clean, green stuff.
Stuff you can rip the bait out of.
Go ahead.
Stuff you can, rip the bait out of.
Right, because there's grass everywhere, but some of that grass has dirt on it. Some of it's, old. It still shows up the same relatively on the depth finder, at least it does for me. But then when I find that really crispy new grass, then that's what I'm fishing.
Right.
At the same token, man, I'm still, I'm still needing time on the water and fishing experience and bites, as opposed to just looking at my units when I'm fishing back there in the South. And so I do spend a lot of time just fishing in practice.
Got it. let's talk about that a little bit. So let's go back to Sam Rayburn and talk about that a little bit. You had a 45 place finish. You got a check out of that one. So I'd say for your first FLW Tour event, that's definitely going to be a successful event for you. I think I would be. If I were in your shoes, I'd been really pumped on a 45th place finish and getting a check out of the first one. So take us through that one. How'd that one go for you?
Practice went pretty well. When I fish, I learned something from a friend a long time ago where he said, if you're fishing the tour and, you're going to places that are huge, because these places are so big. I mean, we fished California Delta, Lake Mead, and these places are 2 and 3 times the size of those.
Wow.
So you're fishing a place where you just, the amount of time that you have, 3 days, is not very much time. So what I'll do is I'll typically break down the lake at home, look at my map, do some past research online of what areas have produced in that lake at the time of year that I'm going there, if I can find that. And then I'll typically break it down into a 7-mile area because I feel like I can effectively fish 2 to 3 miles a day in practice. That's all the time you got.
Yeah.
To effectively break something down. You're trying to fish multiple baits in the same areas to see what you can get bit on, to break that window down and find out what they're going to eat for you in the tournament.
Okay.
So at Rayburn, I broke down a section of lake from the 147 bridge down to, maybe around Mud Creek, not very far down. Pretty small area, in fact. And I chose that area because of past history and what I've seen, guys do over there. And it worked out. So the first day of practice, I started out throwing a spinnerbait. I know they eat spinnerbaits there. It's something that I'm really comfortable with, as opposed to, say, maybe like throwing a rattle trap like a lot of those guys love to do down there.
Yeah.
Because I knew the water is also 9 feet above normal pool. And it's going to be tough to fish that trap that deep. So I'm just throwing a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait, Z-Man sling blade spinnerbait, newer spinnerbait they came out with, and rolling that thing down there over the tops of that hydrilla.
Okay.
And, on the tops and then on the old shoreline. So anywhere from 9 to about 14 feet, I'm throwing that 3/4 ounce blade.
Awesome.
And, found some decent grass, some good grass, and, what we call cuts or guts out on the West Coast, they call drains back there in the South, or at least in Texas. So I'm fishing drains, and, it was pretty simple, I felt like, for me. Now, granted, I didn't catch monster bags like some of those guys did, and I don't want to say I wasn't looking for that, but I was looking for the most consistent areas where I could catch quality bites. And what I justify as quality was the fish that would cut a check. That 13-pound bag, if I just caught all clones.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I caught a couple giants in there, because I did catch some big ones in practice, not true giants, but 5-pounders.
Those are good ones.
Yeah, I caught, 3 or 4 of those in 4 days, and I wasn't trying hard to catch those, but I knew they were still filtering through my areas.
Got it.
And so, I think that's the thing you try and find. And I think you'll see if you watch that tournament as it's now come out online, you'll see that a lot of guys are making very specific, precise casts to certain patches of grass or an area where the old shoreline, maybe meets what the new shoreline is. And there's a specific spot there that those fish want to hold on, like a hard bottom. Like maybe some clay was above that old shoreline, which now came into play, and they're just sitting right there on that clay spot.
Got it. Okay.
So, that was one of those things, and I had some spots where it was kind of a one-cast deal, just like those guys. But instead of catching 5, 6, 7-pounders, 4, 5, 6, 7-pounders, I was catching 2 to 3-pounders, which was honestly fine with me, because I knew as long as I weighed a limit, like I said, of 13 to 14 pounds a day, I was going to cut a decent check. And the mindset of going out there, it wasn't a mindset of fishing for a check. It was a mindset of fishing to catch a limit each day and then give myself an opportunity, especially with a big fish or two, to be up there in the hunt.
Got it. No, that sounds like a good plan to me, and it sounds like it worked out really well for you, and you're able to catch some fish. And it seemed like from somebody on the outside looking in, I mean, I know I was at Havasu at the time that the Rayburn event was going on, but even still, from what I gathered after the event, it seemed like overall the bite was pretty tough. I mean, it always looks like the guys at the top smash them, but that doesn't always mean that the bite overall was good.
Yeah, the bite overall completely depended on the area that you were in and what style of fishing you were doing.
Okay.
Honestly. I mean, like if you I watched Terry Bolton on the final day, and there was a point in the morning where he was just catching them cast after cast after cast. And, they weren't big ones. But I was doing the same thing, and so were a lot of other guys. I mean, I'm sitting there at weigh-in, feeling pretty good. Like, man, I'm catching about 20, maybe 25 fish a day. But then there's guys that, aren't catching a limit, and then there's guys, you're hearing guys come across the stage and say, I caught 60 fish today. And
wow.
they're being honest. So it really depended on what you found and what style of fishing, you found.
Got it. Okay. Well, let's go on to Toho. Toho is a little bit tougher for you. From everything that I've heard, Florida seems to be, kind of unique compared to a lot of the other stuff that, I've fished for sure, and probably what you fished as well. And I would imagine there's some translation maybe between like the Delta and Florida, but it seems like from everything I hear, the Florida's pretty much like its own deal a little bit.
Florida is completely its own deal. I went into Florida with a lot of confidence. I had gone down there in pre-practice with a good friend of mine, and felt like we had dug up some good stuff. I did fish that stuff. It was all offshore, and I was in the vicinity of where that tournament was won. The first day I didn't get any good bites in there. On the second day, I pulled up and caught a 5-pounder immediately, and thought, okay, here we go. Mm-hmm. They're going to be back here. And I caught another 1.5-pounder, and those were the only bites I got there that day. Kind of had to scramble around, and that's not unique. That's unique to Florida, but that's not a unique scenario. That's just kind of the average scenario.
Got it.
You look at that, and Florida tournaments are, they're all the same, really, if you look at them. Look at John Cox. I mean, he smashed almost 32 pounds on day one, caught a 10 and a half and a 9, and had some other great fish to go in the bag. Day two, he backs it up, 17 pounds. That's still a really good Florida bag. And then comes in with 8 pounds, I believe, on day 3. Mm-hmm. That's Florida. I mean, that's what it does to you. One day you can smash the biggest bag of your life, and the next day you can barely catch, 8 pounds.
Right.
So, and you got to think, like, Florida fish they're really fickle. They don't like the weather at all. They hunker down. They don't eat. They just flat out don't eat sometimes. And I think that's kind of what I experienced on day one. I did still stay outside a lot, through a crankbait, through a trap, through a chatterbait, through a swimming worm, which were all things that guys in the top 10 threw for sure.
Right.
I stayed in Toho the entire time. My practice was really good in there. I didn't stick many fish. I very seldom stick fish in practice. More than, honestly, I think in Rayburn in practice, I probably caught about maybe 12 bass in 3 days, and just had a lot of bites. And then at Toho, I believe I caught 8 fish in practice in 3 days.
Okay.
And at that point, didn't have a ton of bites either, honestly. It had kind of switched up, but I also wasn't really, I went out to my first offshore area in practice, and as soon as I got to my mark, I made a cast with a square bill and caught a 5-pounder. So I said, okay, I'm done here. So I packed up and left. Same thing on another area. Went to another area, made a cast in there, caught a 4.5-pounder, left. So, you just don't know. I mean, it's tough to know. Hindsight is, Were those the only ones that are sitting there, or did they just not bite the day that I was there?
Right. Yeah. Do you think that the way the weather was, because obviously, MLF was there doing their thing before you guys got there, and it was cold, and all that was going on, and then it started to warm up. Do you think that kind of screwed up maybe what you found pre-practicing, or was it just they were moving up, getting ready to do their thing?
Yeah, it definitely hurt. I mean, there's no question. I would have loved for it to stay nasty and stormy and cold. For me, I think that I think it would have put more pressure in my areas offshore. But at the same time, I kind of had I feel like pretty dialed. Made a few more marks in those offshore areas in practice, caught a few more fish, expanded a little bit. But a lot of that offshore stuff wasn't the easiest to find. In a 3-day practice. That's why it was nice to have a 3-day pre-practice and then come back and expand on it with a 3-day practice.
For sure. So let's go back to 2018, where you had a real good Costa year out here on the West Coast, 4th overall in Angler of the Year standings, and there's some sticks out here in the West, man. So, getting a 4th place finish is killer, and that's what propelled you to be get your invite into the tour for this year, right?
Yeah, that's where I got the invite from. Was having a good year there. I would say that really a lot of stuff ended up happening. I sold a boat in 2016, I believe, and it was the Bass Cat that I had my whole life. I sold it, and I was waiting on a boat for about 9 months. So I fished co-angler. With one bass, or not one bass, excuse me, Wild West Bass Trail.
Okay.
I fished the coast side. I went to Shasta just for fun. Somebody's like, hey, we need another guy in the house. Why don't you come down? Okay, I come down. Come down there. Can't even fish with my left arm. I'd had an injury, so I just bring spinning rods, basically, and end up finishing 9th there. And then go to Mojave and fish there as a co, just for fun. Actually, a buddy said, hey, will you come down and fish? He came in from Salt Lake City, and he's like, hey, I'll pay for your plane ticket if you'll fly out tomorrow. I'm, bored in the hotel room alone. All right, fine. So he paid for me to fly down there, end up leading that event going into the final day. Lost. I don't even know. I mean, I fish for smallmouth all the time. Big ones, catch them, 25 to 30-pound bags. Often, and I lost on that day at Mojave. I'm going to say somewhere in the 23 to 24-pound range of fish. End up weighing in one fish for 14 ounces.
Wow! And that was
fall out of the lead. What's that?
And that was when Wild West was doing the co-anglers run your own boat on the final day, right? Because I fished that Mojave tournament, and that was my first ever pro-am fishing, and I had a blast fishing it, but for me, I didn't figure anything out until my second day of that tournament. But yeah, someone like you with all the experience, it had to be something that you looked forward to on the final day, being able to run that boat yourself.
Yeah, it was really nice. At Shasta, they didn't give us any friendly water. We had just the squaw arm, and me having a hurt arm, I couldn't throw anything reaction. I was just throwing like a tube and stuff like that, and the water was super dirty in there, and it just didn't play out. But at Mojave, I was catching all my fish off of beds, even when I was in the back of the boat. A guy'd be going down the bank, I'd spot one that he didn't see, I'd throw to it, catch it. And it was the same thing the final day. I don't know, I couldn't keep anything pegged. I had never heard of, fishing a fly for bedfish. And these guys were doing that because those fish were biting really funky. They were just, I was throwing a Senko at them, and they just weren't eating it on the final day. They ate it the first 2. I never had any problems losing fish, and then the final day, just couldn't pin one to save my life.
Yeah, I found out a lot about the fly come that tournament too, and now it's definitely something that when it comes to those smallmouth, for sure, that's that can be a smallmouth killer.
Yeah, they suck that bait in. It's no problem. And I'm sure, honestly, had I had a fly, I had one cove where I missed 4 bedfish, and I missed 3 of the 4 on multiple accounts, multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
and just killed me. I mean, it was also difficult when I travel. I travel in one Plano 370 box. That's all I take with me. And I was fishing out of a buddy Clayton Meyer's boat, and he's been a West Coast hammer for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And the rule was though that you couldn't, if you're borrowing a boat, you couldn't get into the tackle of the person who owned the boat. So I honored the rule and didn't get in there. I just didn't have the right stuff to throw at those fish. In my own boat or dishonestly getting into his stuff. Without a doubt, I can catch at least. I only needed 2 of those fish to win. I lost by 4 pounds with one 14-ounce fish, and it would have been.
Wow.
I lost a fish with 5 minutes to go that I believe would have went well over 6, and I lost her at the rail trying to get her in the net. And it's just one of those things. It's just that's probably the worst. I'll call it luck that I've ever had in a tournament.
Wow, that's brutal when you got that chance to win. It's one thing to, not be in that position and have some bad luck, but to be in a position to win and have that kind of luck, that's brutal. That's a tough way to lose it when you found them, could have caught them, and it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, when you get them to bite and you lose them, that's on you. I mean, some of that's on you. And they're biting funny, but some of that, when you've got all that going on, it's on you. But anyway, so fast forward from that, then I go to the U.S. Open. Late 2017, practicing. I go, man, I was practicing with a friend from Southern California and kind of rolling down this bank. I make one cast with a spinnerbait and I catch a 5-pounder, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But when she comes up, she's got some really nice green grass on the blade, hydrilla. So I catch her and I immediately put my rods down. I start metering this area. Looking at it, it's got some rock veins with some hydrilla running through these veins. I said, this is where the U.S. Open will be won. If I can fish this spot, I will win it here.
Mm-hmm.
And as luck would have it, I wasn't the only one that found it. Justin Patty pulled in there about 15 seconds before me on the first day. We shared water. The whole entire tournament, both of us kind of shared that spot. And he ended up winning, and I ended up getting 9th. And then from there, it just kept rolling. I mean, 9th there, 5th at Shasta for Wild West. Then I went to Havasu, never been there before, threw a Senko, and caught. I think I was 17 and a half on the first day. Was up there, tied for second, I believe. Next day, broke off one and lost one at the boat that. Easily would have made the cut. I believe I would have been leading that tournament going to the final day. And that's just fishing, but still finished in 17th there.
That was FLW, right?
That was FLW, yeah, for the Costas. And then went to Don Pedro and ended up getting second there for Wild West. And back to the Delta for Wild West. Did absolutely terrible. Never been there before. And finished in 96th. Trying to fish... information. Hey, I've never been to the Delta. Can you help me out? Oh, fish here, do this. Fish here, do this. For me, definitely not the thing to do. Fishing somebody else's information. Doesn't work for most people. Definitely does not work for me.
So if you could do something different at the Delta, fishing more your style, what do you think you would have done? And for people that don't know, the Delta's got tons of grass. Everything looks fishy. There's matted grass, there's submerged grass, there's pads everywhere, there's everywhere on the Delta looks fishy. So, that kind of gives people an idea a little bit.
If I had to do things over on the Delta, especially seeing the time of year that we were there, and going back there, and knowing now kind of who does what and how they do it there after, being there and seeing what goes on, if I was to go there again, I honestly believe that going there when we went there, and it was kind of a funky bite. You were there. The weather was a little bit up and down, if you will, right? I mean, it just wasn't the greatest weather.
Yeah.
I think that I personally would throw one rod. I would throw a drop shot the entire time. That's probably all I would do if I was going back.
Yeah, my biggest fish I caught the entire trip was on a drop shot on outside toolies.
Yeah, and I got, caught up in a lot of different things, if you will. Trying to do this, trying to do that, and that's not my game. My game is really simple. I can tell you. I can tell you at the U.S. Open, I caught all my fish on a jig. Rolling into Shasta, I caught all my fish on a Senko and a really shallow jerkbait. Going to Pedro, I caught all my fish on a drop shot and a Texas rig. I know on the footage of Wild West on the last day you saw me chucking the Carolina rig around a little bit, and I caught a couple fish on that. Didn't weigh those fish in. They all came on a Texas rig that day late in the afternoon. And then, going to Havasu, I caught all my fish on a Senko. Then, like that Delta tournament, I threw the kitchen sink at them, and I did terrible.
Mm-hmm.
We go to Clear Lake for, FLW, and I caught all my fish on the first day throwing a rip bait, and when I only caught 12.5 pounds, soon realized that I needed to mix it up a little bit. Second day, went out, caught limit on a rip bait real quick, and then started throwing a Carolina rig the entire rest of the day and caught 17.5 pounds and snap your finger. It literally took me, I think I had those fish in about 10 minutes.
Wow.
It was fast. Extremely fast. It was just cast after cast after cast to the point that my co-was like, hey, I'm just going to stand here with a net. So, they had backed out. It was the first. I was catching my fish on, pilings, throwing a rip bait around pilings. And they basically all pulled out, all the quality fish, the 3 and 4s that I was catching, pulled right back to the first drain, first cut, first gut, whatever you want to say. There was a little bit of hydrilla in there, and they pulled right out to that first edge of that hydrilla, and we're sitting right on the outside. I was throwing a Z-Man fatties on that Carolina rig, and that Z-Man product floats. So I think it was extremely important. I mixed it up after that and never got bit throwing anything else. Thought maybe I can throw, say a trick worm or something like that in there, and never got bit. And I wouldn't even move the bait. I'd throw the Carolina rig in there, and I'd just literally let it sit until one swam over and ate the bait. And I think it's because the bait was sitting up above the grass a little bit on that outside edge.
That would make sense.
Because I had a co, and I told him, I said, you can throw in there. So he threw a Senko in there, on a nail weight, threw several different things in there. They wouldn't touch it. So that's just one of those things where kind of right place, right time, exact right rig. And that stuff happens. That really does. It happens. And a lot of times I think you see that when you see a win, when you see somebody go coast to coast with something, they did that in practice, and it just stayed for them the entire time.
Yeah. So let's go back up. You guys finished the FLW at the Delta, right? Because it went Havasu, Clear Lake, Delta, and that was later on in the year in September, which is going to be totally different than like when we were there for the Wild West. So how'd that one shake up for you? I know that there was a little boating fiasco for you out there in that one, right?
Yeah, we had a little problem there, with the boat. I think that I was coming out of Frank's into Old River area, and I think we just hit current, honestly, and maybe some air got between the prop and I don't know what, but I think that's what happened, because couldn't find any malfunctions or any codes or anything with the boat. I think we had a little air in the prop. When you got air in a prop, it slips. That's just what it does, and I think that plus the current gave us a problem. But that practice was entirely different for me. I knew that, obviously you're at the Delta in September. The fish are going to be active. It's warm, so I really tried to dial my tide charts in a lot better at that tournament. Get to know it a little more. Spend time chasing it a little bit during practice, and not necessarily chasing it from spot to spot, but chasing the tide from area to area, if that makes sense. Not running a mile to chase the tide to a spot, but running 4 miles to chase the tide to another area.
Do you think that that was successful for you in terms of being able to run it with? Because I know a lot of, from what I hear, a lot of the guys that are, you know, Delta guys, they'll do that a lot because the fish are active during that tide. So the longer you can run it, the more active fish are going to be around.
It was definitely a huge factor for me. In practice, when I got on perfect tides, I could light them up real easy. I mean, practice each day for me, excuse me, you know, 18 to 21 pounds a day, no problem.
Got it.
I think that definitely could have happened for me in the tournament, but the first day, I mixed my tides up and made a mental error and ran down south first when I should have ran north first, and I ran south. And granted, I should say, I'm by no means a Delta expert, by no means know very much about the Delta, but for the tides I was fishing, the way I was fishing the tides, I made the moves backwards. So I ran south first. Man, I pulled up. I had been throwing a walking bait and lighting them up in practice, and I start throwing the walking bait, and I'm just getting lit up cast after cast. They're all stripers. They're good ones. They're 4 to 10 pounders, quality fish. And, I catch like 1 or 2 bass mixed in. They're maybe 2 pounders. But the stripers were in there. And, so I had to, then I was forced to stay, basically. So I stayed and had to wait through all of that to get to my window down there. But I wasted what would have been 3 hours of critical time up north. Had I ran to my north fish first and then came back down, I think I would have been significantly better off. I only caught, I think, 12 pounds, maybe 12 and a half that day. Next day I go out, say, well, I know I did it wrong. And even though I've lost an hour in my window because of the tide changing, I'm still going to go north. So I go north, and I get there, and I had drawn Rachel Uribe, and she's a great fisherman. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to throw like some bigger reaction and let her, because she was going to throw a drop shot and like a nail weight. So I kind of let her, do that. And so she started out and she caught, I think, the first 3. And, they were like 1.5 to 2 pounders. So they were not bad fish, but I just kept throwing the reaction. As soon as I get to my better area, there's definitely stretches of better grass and bank and whatnot. And as soon as I get to the better area, I throw up there, I catch 4-pounder on chatterbait. And so I said, I know. So I ended up leaving there with a limit. I only stayed for 1 hour because I knew my window had shrunk. So I knew with the time it took me to run south that I'd be there. Sure enough, go back down there, pitch to a little tule clump just on a bank. I've been throwing topwater on that bank. Pitch over there at Senko, catch 2.5-pounder, and we just keep working through there. She filled out her limit. I culled a couple times. We got to a slack tide, and I thought, with the way the grass set up north, it was just going to be the spot to go. And I ran back up there, and, I only had 2 rods at this point because I'd lost all my other rods the day before in my incident. So I had 2 rods, so I was alternating baits back and forth, and I hadn't thrown a drop shot, but I tied a drop shot on, and first outside clump I came to, I pitched my drop shot over there, and it's sitting there, and then it just starts swimming off. I swing on it, it's 4-pounder. And I'm like, okay, here we go. They're here. I'm going to catch them. We fish around that area for a while longer, and the wind starts blowing fairly hard, so I'm fishing the backside of some current breaks and stuff. Go and get right where I caught my chatterbait fish and stick a 4.5-pound spinnerbait fish. And that's just kind of how it rolled for me. It was fishing by the seat of my pants all year, basically, throwing what felt good to throw. And just after I had that terrible tournament in the Delta, I just fished nobody's information. I just went out, I went fishing, did my thing, stuck with the 4 or 5 confidence baits that I really throw. And that was that. Just threw what what my gut told me to throw.
Got it. Well, it obviously worked out for you, man. And I know you got family stuff going. And are there any sponsors you want to shout out, or
Yeah, Seaman is probably one of my biggest sponsors for sure. That makes some great product. I throw a ton of their soft plastic line and their new spinnerbait to sling blades. I throw a ton. Obviously the chatterbait, from original chatterbait all the way through the jackhammer. Triton boats. I started running a Triton this year. Just a phenomenal boat. You got the whole package with that boat. Certain boats do a lot of things really well, and I feel like that Triton's kind of been redesigned and really liking that. Garmin are the electronics I run. All the electronics are good out there. I run Garmin. I feel like they're with the Panoptics capabilities and the things that they offer, maybe a touch above the rest, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Then I throw Daiwa rods and reels. I've been throwing Daiwa reels for basically my entire life, 20 years. I started out throwing the SS tournaments way back then,
mm-hmm.
and some of the Team Daiwa casting stuff. I know it's definitely come up recently. And then just there's a whole bunch of other people that do support me. As far as Power Pole does a great job. Support a lot of the guys on tour. Make a great product. If you're looking for a shallow water anchor, I'm going Power Pole. G Money Jigs is a good friend of mine. Trey makes all my football head stuff. Nixon's Marine is up here in the Northwest. They're a great supporter of what I do. I'm drawing a blank on some other stuff there.
It's all right, man. I get how it goes with that. You've been on stage and you're trying to make sure you said everybody's name. I get it, but dude, I just want to say thanks for being a part of this, letting me interview you. I think that this conversation's been really cool. I think a lot of good information's come out of it, and just your history, and everyone just thinks everyone just starts out as a pro, but they don't realize that even you being a pretty young guy still was fishing the last 20 years. And thanks again for being on here, and I appreciate you taking the time, man.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on here and kind of chat with you a little bit and share some of my story.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things. There's so much time that has to be dedicated to the fishing end of it alone.
Mm-hmm.
Being out there on the water and learning and adjusting. All that I can really say is, if you're an angler and you're trying to get out there and you want to do it, really find your niche. Find what you do well and stick with that. If you say you throw jigs, throw jigs. If you're a drop shot guy, throw a drop shot jig. If you're a reaction guy, throw the reaction that you like to throw. For the most part, a bass is a bass is a bass. They're going to eat whatever you throw to them. Obviously, there's certain times of year where things come into play. I totally understand that. Seasonal patterns are a big deal. But do what you do, and if you keep it pretty narrow, that's probably going to be, my biggest key to success out there for guys that are trying to do it.
Awesome, man. That's I'm going to take something from that, and I think that that's really good info, and I think we want to be versatile, but we also need to have some strengths that we can rely upon. So I think that's pretty good info, man. Well, thanks again, dude. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that you've been crazy busy running around fishing, and you're back home, and I just appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I can't wait for other people to be able to watch this.
Right on, man. I really appreciate it.